had occasional doubts about, that the Chinese Communist Party, let me make a distinction, would keep their word, and they have pretty comprehensively broken their word, which is contained in an international treaty lodged at the United Nations called the Joint Declaration. A great American political scientist, that Hong Kong, and he was writing then in the 80s and early 90s, Hong Kong was the only society you could think of which was liberal with the rule of law, but didn't have complete democracy. That's absolutely true. I wasn't elected, I was appointed, but I was appointed to serve people in Hong Kong, not to serve London or to serve Beijing. Hong Kong was different from any other colony. We weren't in a position where we were preparing it for independence, because part of it was held on a lease and it was always being returned to China. And when in the 50s and 60s, occasionally, British governments used to talk about a faster pace of democratization in Hong Kong, the Chinese, including Zhou Enlai on one occasion, said, you can't do that. If you do that, people in Hong Kong will get the impression they're being prepared for independence, and they're not. They're coming back to the motherland, quote unquote. But I did always rather question the point that was made endlessly by my biggest critic, who was a former British ambassador in China called Percy Craddock. And he'd been very close to Margaret Thatcher. That was very much driven by him when the Joint Declaration was agreed. And when people were arguing that there should be an arbitration mechanism in it, he said, no, no, no. And his argument was this. He said, and he had reason for realizing this because he'd been in the British embassy when it was burnt down during the Cultural Revolution. He said, the Chinese leaders may be thuggish dictators, but they're men of their word. Now, we know that part of that is true, the first bit, but the second part isn't. And you can look at things all around the world, examples of the Chinese simply breaking international agreements. President Obama said it about them in relation to the WTO. People who loved Hong Kong but can't bear the thought of bringing up their children. I was with lots of them last night. They were getting me to sign my book for them. They hate the idea of what they've always regarded as a free and open society suddenly being one in which, as a recent panorama by the BBC was pointing out, stops free speech, arrests people, and always has looming over them the prospect of them being incarcerated.